Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to this week's edition of Talk Back. My name is Eric Nesbit. I'm one of your hosts, and with me, as always, is our host and director of content, Justin Gay, and he has lined up another phenomenal show for this week. Justin, a lot of hot topics around sports, and just as two fans who watch sports all the way from football to basketball to the action on the track in NASCAR, I know you've got a lot lined up for us, so we're going to get right into it. In segment one, it's NFL talk once again, but there are some things going on that just absolutely need to be discussed because my Philadelphia Eagles, and please don't laugh at me from across the table here, are 3-4, and I'm a little concerned. So we're going to kick off the show talking about those Philadelphia Eagles. But then we need to discuss Jacksonville. We need to discuss Gruden. What is Chucky doing in Oakland with those Raiders? Certainly Dallas is trying to make some fixes. And then the Tennessee Titans, they're locked up in a tough division with those Jaguars and also the Houston Texans. So a lot to talk about there with what they did this past week. And finally, we'll end the NFL with something that, well, we've talked about a lot, and that's the story of Colin Kaepernick, but now it's extended out to Eric Reid and Malcolm Jenkins and stuff that we've seen on the field this past week. Then in segment two, we get to talk about LeBron James and those Lakers. There was some excitement in their game with the Rockets, and certainly that's a hot topic going around as we look at talk-worthy events in the world of sports. But Oklahoma City, the Lakers, the Rockets, there's a lot of teams struggling. Meanwhile, Kawhi and those Raptors, they're off to a hot start. And we'll finalize the show with a look at NASCAR. What is going on with Jimmy Johnson? He's out of the playoffs, but there's some surprising things that we need to look at, not only with Jimmy Johnson, with Stewart-Haas Racing. Justin has some questions about Chase Elliott. We'll kind of tie a nice little bow around the NASCAR season as we head into the final four races of the year. That's Talk Back for episode 222. We'll hit you up after the break.
We're back, and let's jump right into segment one, and let's talk some NFL. And let's start with two teams that we had high expectations for that are both trending in the wrong direction. And surprisingly, will actually play each other in London in Week 8. So let's start off with the Philadelphia Eagles. They are now just 3-4 on the season. They've lost the last two games. They've actually played at home at Lincoln Financial Field. And sandwiched in between there was a win at MetLife versus the Giants. But a team that has played so well at home has actually dropped their last two there at the Link. Something that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way post-game was Doug Peterson's comments saying that really this team now has no pressure on them. No one is expecting anything from this team. But, Eric, that has not set well with a lot of people from around the league, a lot of people that cover this league, and even some Eagles fans. So I'm curious to get your take. Do you like this message, playing up that underdog card they had so much success with last year, or should this Eagles team be feeling a lot of pressure right now to perform better and start to get some W's?
Honestly, Justin, I hate this message. It's just a terrible look for a coach who just comes off a win in the Super Bowl, now trying to regress and tell his team the same message that worked for them last year. And look, that was a great message last year, but you can't do that in year two. You can't now go back and say, well, we've had some rough times to start the season and now, well, we're the underdog again. No, that's crap. You have basically the same team that you had last year, if not a little bit better, because some of your defensive guys are back from injury. Now, they just did lose Barnett this week, so that kind of sucks, but they've got basically the same roster. Now they've got Carson Wentz. The only thing that's really hurt them lately is their running game, because Ajayi is now injured and Blount wasn't there this year. I think that's going to really mess them up, and they need to be looking for that. But outside of that, this whole press conference, this whole mood that he put forward is just a bag of excuses, and I hated it. I really hated it, because even as a fan of the Eagles, I don't want to hear that. We're now Super Bowl champions. You need to act like you're Super Bowl champions. You don't get to go to the next year and say, well, we're still underdogs. No, you were expected to win this division and almost be the best team in the NFC outside of maybe what they were looking to do in Los Angeles, which is proving true with the Rams or the Vikings or potentially the Packers. But outside of that, you were looked at as the favorite in the NFC. So don't give me that underdog thing again. That's baloney. So, Justin, no, I hate it.
You have to hate it because last year, this message worked once Carson Wentz went out, and no one really expected anything from this Eagles team because they were going to Nick Foles. So then everyone wrote them off, including us. We didn't know what to expect from this team with Nick Foles. We had to go back to look at the player that he was and what he had put on the field in his starts prior to that, and it wasn't very good. And even his starts in the regular season were not very good. He just kind of got better and better as the playoffs went on. And still every round, no one really gave them any chance of success except what that team believed in their locker room, and that message resonated. Eric, this and the next topic we'll talk about were two things we talked about specifically in our preview show for both the teams that we're going to discuss here in Jacksonville and now Philadelphia. The topic that we had for the Eagles was, would this team be able to rise up week in, week out, take the opponent's best punch? They wouldn't be able to sort of come out of nowhere and surprise anyone, that everyone was going to expect this team to be in a position to potentially repeat their performance from last year. And would this Eagles team be ready for that? Would they be ready for the role to be the hunted versus being the hunter? They just haven't been there. They have not performed to the level that they should be playing at. As you said, this team has pretty much everybody back from last year. Now, their injuries are starting to mount up, but this is the NFL. We're nearly at the halfway point for a lot of these teams. Injuries are starting to mount up for everyone. So that's an excuse the Eagles can't use. They've got running backs there. Doug Peterson, he was upset even earlier this week in his press conference when a reporter asked him if he felt he should have ran the ball more in the fourth quarter to try to preserve that lead versus Carolina. And he got testy with the reporter. But, Eric, I think that's a fair question. They're up 17-0 at home, and they end up getting beat. You're going to have to answer those questions. So I know running back is an issue for this team, but is it paramount now that this Eagles team, do you feel like they need to make a trade for a running back?
Well, they do. I think that's a fair point, but it's an excuse. And I think it's a big point, because when you lose Ajayi to an ACL and you don't have Blount, and you look at the success that their offense was able to have last year as a result of not only them, but then what they could do prior to, Darren Sproles being injured, but also with Clement, with Smallwood, different guys being mixed in. They've got that same power this year, except now anybody that would have been an RB1 or an RB2 is gone. And so you're trying to fill that gap right now. Yeah, I think they do need to do something because it's still so early in the season, and that NFC East, quite frankly, is a mess. So winning that division is still a huge possibility. And so if you can fill that hole, you've got to do that. But Justin, I did want to mention too that the other reason I think this underdog thing is nothing but a pile of crap is because look at how they've lost their games. Week 2 against Tampa Bay, they lost by 6 and really could have won that game. Week 4 against Tennessee, I hated the loss there. A tough loss with Minnesota, but only by 2 points in week 5. And then this week in Carolina, I mean, that's just when the crap is hitting the fan because you dominate the whole game. You're up 17-0 after 3 quarters. You even get a couple of minutes into the fourth quarter. Okay, you give up a score. That's to be expected with a Cam Newton-led offense out of Carolina. But then you go and give up 2 more scores in the final 4 minutes of that game to actually lose the game at your home field. That's terrible. And so you can't say it's because, now we're going to go and be the underdog. You're just playing bad. I'm sorry, but you are just giving away games that you can't afford to give away. They could really be 1 loss or 2 losses at the most right now. Instead, they're sitting there at 3-4. It's not underdog. It's pathetic.
And I think the bigger concern, and I'm sure it's something that's on your mind, is the 3 wins you have are against 3 teams in this league that are not very good. You have the 1-win Giants they have a win against. They beat the Falcons in week 1. The Falcons can't seem to close anybody out. We saw that on Monday night that they nearly let the Giants come back in that game and needed a 55, 56-yard field goal there late in the fourth quarter to pretty much ice that game and into a 2-possession game to even beat the Giants. And the Giants just went into some type of malfunction mode trying to sneak Eli. And then the Colts have not performed very well. They just got their second win this past week in week 7. So they haven't really beaten any team I think that we're going to see playing any type of meaningful football in late December and January. And you look at their schedule, they're in London to play Jacksonville. They get their bye week. Then they get the Dallas Cowboys in Philly. Well, the Cowboys just picked up a player that we're going to talk about, and he's going to be now with that team for several weeks by the time that game takes place. Then they're at New Orleans. They get a reprieve with the Giants at home. Then they still got 2 games left with Washington. They have another game left with Dallas. They get the Rams. And then they have the Texans at home. So they do not have a very easy schedule. And like you said, this division, no one has run away with yet. Washington sitting there, +1 in the win column, 1 less in the loss column because they've already had their bye. So they could potentially just be 1 game out with 2 games versus Washington left to play. So it's not exactly panic mode yet. They're still very much in this division. But I don't think the message from your leader, from your head coach can be, oh, we're just not going to worry about this. The pressure should be on this team, Eric. They should feel like a team that's going to play with desperation and try to save their season. And I think we're in unison on that point. A team that's not in unison, based on what happened post-game in their locker room, is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Eric, this was another team. We discussed this possibility in the preview show months ago when we talked about what we could see. The writing was on the wall. A dominant defense that plays with a lot of swagger and talks a lot, playing with an offense that at times is just abysmal. And it came to a head this week as Blake Bortles finally was benched. He had multiple turnovers in this game, really let the Texans take control of this game. The offense couldn't do anything. Bortles gets benched for Cody Kessler. Looks like they're going to turn back to Bortles on a short leash for week 8 versus Philadelphia. But again, Eric, this was something that we could see coming. The Jaguars did nothing. They actually extended Bortles out for that 5th year of his rookie deal. They've had opportunities to make some plays for quarterbacks. They've done nothing. They did go out and make a trade to get Carlos Hyde from the Browns because Leonard Fournette looks to be out past their bye. Looks like maybe a week 10 return for him. And we talked about the importance that he makes on this team in terms of the run game. But Eric, is it a mistake for this team that they didn't trade for a quarterback and really at this point aren't looking for some type of upgrade at that position? Or do you feel like they can survive with Carlos Hyde until Leonard Fournette gets back, and then this team will look more like the team we saw last year get to the AFC Championship game?
Well, I think it's a good multifaceted question because as a team that kind of did so much with a guy like Leonard Fournette last year, certainly having him missing is a big piece of that offense that's not there. You've got a guy like Dante Moncrief who's stepped up and done well, and honestly, I thought he would do more coming from a team like Indianapolis where it looked like his star was on the rise. And, you know, Blake Bortles, his floor and his ceiling, we've talked about it last week, we've talked about it before, there's just too much of a gap there to be called an NFL starting quarterback. You cannot have a guy who could throw for 176 yards in 1 week and 388 yards in another week and then 149 the next week. There's just too much variance there. And you're not going to win a lot of ball games. And more importantly, to your point about the locker room scuffle, you're starting to see now that the defense is getting very irritated with the Blake Bortles-led offense because they're exhausted. They're not off the field for very long. There's too many 3-and-outs happening. This defense is a good defense, but they're definitely struggling. They had a bad loss in week 3 against Tennessee, 9-6. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Bortles, again, 155 yards. That was just a terrible game. But then they came back and beat the Jets 31-12. They lost to Kansas City the week after that. And now we know that Kansas City is probably for real in the AFC. But then you lose to Dallas 40-7 and Houston 20-7. It's unacceptable. Look, we all know Cody Kessler's not the answer, but Blake Bortles probably isn't the answer either. So I get your question about Hyde and Fournette, and I think that's certainly playing a factor in all this. But Justin, this team will likely go as Blake Bortles goes because we trust their defense. But now, as good as the defense is, they're certainly making mistakes. They're probably making mistakes out of sheer exhaustion. And now it's boiled over. It's reached a tipping point. They are ticked off at Bortles and the offense. I'm nervous for the Eagles, though, to be honest with you, because of two reasons. One, Jacksonville has made that trip to London before. They know what they're dealing with. But also, you've got a pretty ticked off team now who needs a win badly.